I'm Clay Layne, Caterpillar's North American Waste Application Specialist, and we're going to talk walkarounds on this D6 waste handler here. So, once again, doing walkarounds, doesn't matter where you start the walkaround, just as long as you do it in the same place every time, make it a routine. I myself, I'm left-handed, so I like the left front no matter what the machine is. Left front's where I'm going to start. So, for starters though, before we get going, I'm going to walk over and I want to open up the compartment here. And I want to make sure that my disconnect is off so the machine has no power, okay? We've confirmed that. So now I'm going to come back up to the front. And I'm going to start up here in the front area. And some of the things that I'm looking for, I'm going to look at the back part of the blade and the trash rack, make sure none of the welds are cracked, okay? Some of the things that will draw my attention to the weld, once again, would be if I see a rust streak on the weld, good indication that I've got a crack there, it's getting some moisture. Another thing is if I see some cracked spider webbed paint, there's a good indication that maybe I had some structural damage and it cracked that paint, so it's going to draw my attention to it as well. But inside this area here, we're going to look at our blade cylinders, and we want to look at the chrome. We want to make sure there's no pitted, no gouging, no scratches on there. Also, I want to go in, I want to always keep that rag with me, and I want to get in the habit of taking the rag and just wiping around that dust seal on any of my hydraulic cylinders, because as that dust builds up and every time that cylinder comes in, it's going to take a little bit of dust with it, and eventually I'm going to end up contaminating my hydraulic system. So I want to make sure that I keep those dust boots clean. But as I'm inside here, I want to look at the C-frame. I want to look at all the bolts where the C-frame connects into the blade on the back here. All my hoses, once again, my hoses right through here are protected, but I want to look to make sure none of them are rubbing on the paint or anything like that to where it's eventually going to wear through. Also, I've got a step right here. Once again, it's a heavy duty step. It's got rigid points on it to where it's going to give me better traction as I go to step up, and I need to check anything as I get up top here. I'm going to look at my handhelds. Once again, these are solid steel. They're bolted on, so I want to make sure those bolts are tight, but they're solid steel so they won't wear. So good safety feature for me climbing up on it. I've also got it up top. I need to make sure those bolts there are tight as well, as I need to step up. So if I'm going to get on this machine, I'm going to put a foot there and I'm going to grab the handle there and climb up if I got to get up and check anything out up top, okay? I'm going to look inside the radiator compartment here to make sure there's no debris or anything inside there. Make sure the fan's okay. And then I'm going to work my way out. But the other thing is, I can't forget either, I've got grease zerks on all my bearings and any of my points that move. So I want to make sure we're looking in the OMM and know how often I need to grease those, and whether it's a daily or a weekly, but we want to make sure that we're maintaining any of our grease points. So I'm going to look at the C-frame once again as I step out, looking at that cylinder. Now, once I've completed that front, I'm going to start inspecting my undercarriage. And some of the things that I'm looking for in my undercarriage, I want to look inside of my track shoes. I want to make sure they're all lined up and good. I want to make sure any spots that I have bolts, I want to make sure they're screwed in and they're tight and they're not hanging down. Down underneath here on my roller frame, I want to make sure any of those bolts are tight and not loose or hanging down. I want to look at the overall track, right? I want to make sure I've got good tension on my track. And there's an easy process for the operator, for us in our daily inspections to check, make sure we got good track tension. I can get that out of the OMM. But if I do have a carrier roller like this one does, basically what I'm going to do is run a string, get a tight straight edge from the top here and then over the edge here on those highest points, and I want to measure the lowest point of the sag. And then I'll do that up there, and then I'm going to average that out, and it's going to give me what my measurement should be in the OMM. So make sure we're looking in the OMM and we're checking that out. I want to look at my carrier roller. Some of the things I'm going to look for in the carrier roller is I want to make sure my carrier roller is nice and round, because as debris builds up around that carrier roller throughout the day, whether it's waste, whether it's mud, whatever the case may be, but that carrier roller can seize up due to debris being packed around it. And then what will happen is we'll get a flat spot as that track slides over the carrier roller. So I want to make sure I'm keeping an eye on that. And that's also a good point as far as when we're working throughout the day, looking at the other machines that are running, but make sure we're letting each other know and keeping an eye on that, hey, your carrier roller's not spinning. We need to get out and clean that up, as we should clean out our tracks each day anyway. Okay, I'm going to step over here. We're going to open up this compartment, and inside here is my disconnect. So big red knob there, turn it on. I've got power, turn it off, I don't have power. I've got a switch for lights. I've got an emergency shut off. Once again, if we have an emergency, I've got a fire on the machine, I've got fluid pouring out of it, I can flip that switch and shut that machine off from the ground level. I've got my hour meter up top here. Also, I've got the stickers that tells me on here what each one of these switches are. But also on this particular machine, just as we've talked with other machines, we do have a wait to disconnect light. That wait to disconnect light, which means I'm purging the system of DEF out of the lines. That light is a little rectangle right above the top here on the hour meter. Okay, when that's illuminated, once again, we can't shut the disconnect off because we're doing a purge of the DEF, okay? We're gonna shut that. We're gonna continue to move on. Some of the things that I wanna look at in here that's really important where I can get the information out of my OMM. But as far as grease and maintenance, I got an equalizer bar that's going underneath this machine. It's connected to each one of my tracks. So we need to know what is the procedure as far as maintenance. Does it have a Zerk on it? Do I need to grease that? How often do I need to grease it? Is it oil filled? My OMM is going to tell me that, but we want to make sure that we're keeping this area clean where I can see in there and able to service the equalizer bar that's going underneath the tracks and underneath the machine. I'm going to step back. I'm going to look at my final drive here and my sprocket. A couple things that I'm going to look at here. I want to make sure all the bolts on the sprocket are tight. This sprocket is 5 segments that are all bolted on. I want to make sure those bolts stay tight because once the 1 or 2 of those bolts get loose and that thing is slopping around, it'll oval out the holes that it holds it on where the bolts go, and you'll never be able to get those tight again because of it ovaling out. So make sure we're looking at the sprockets that are tight. Make sure we're looking at the teeth, and the teeth aren't wore. Okay, we want good wear there. I want to make sure I don't have any leaks on the final when I look at my drain plugs. Make sure those are good and tight. Checking out the rest of the roller frame as I come along this way. Looking at my back idlers. Once again, looking at my bolts, make sure they're tight. Another thing to pay attention to as well with most of our waste handlers is this one's a VPAT blade and it doesn't have the push arms here. But if I have the regular push arms, I want to look and make sure that back here where the push arms are bolt onto the undercarriage, that the shims and the bolts are tight. So that way I don't have any slop in that blade. So we need to look that up, but pay attention if we do have those push arms. That'd be another inspection point. And then once again, I'm just gonna look the rest of the the tracks and the shoes as I come back. I'm gonna step behind here and I wanna be able to look into where I can see my dual cone seals and the guarding over the dual cone seals and make sure I don't have any leaks or anything coming out of the final drives. And another inspection point that we need to discuss is our pivot shaft and our pivot shaft oil. So the pivot shaft is located right underneath the finals here. But also to check the oil on it is I've got a plug or a reservoir underneath the sprocket here. So we're gonna have to clean that out so I can get in there and check that pivot shaft oil. So right underneath, so right here is a plug. I need to take that plug off, pull that out, and my pivot shaft, my oil should be to the bottom of the threads inside there. But now you can see why it's very important to keep our tracks and our undercarriage clean every night after we get done working. Now as we come to the back part of the machine, some of the things that I'm going to look for in my daily inspection back here are, once again, this gives me a good line of sight back here in between the track and the frame of the machine. Once again, looking at that final, looking at the pivot shaft, make sure I don't see any fluids leaking down, make sure I don't have any debris caught up into that dual cone seal again. Once again, looking at the bolts, make sure my handholds are solid, no loose bolts. I've also got a ladder here. I want to make sure it's always in place. I've got safety straps on here to hold the ladder in place. But when I need to fuel this machine, I'll unhook it. I can climb up safely using 3 points of contact, get up the backside here if I need to fuel it when I would fuel that machine up. Working my way around as I'm still looking up, I'm going to look up at the top of the cab. I'm going to look at the window guard. I'm going to look at the back part of the machine. And now also I'm going to look at my striker bar and my striker bar box. I'm going to open the box up. These are Solid steel doors, very heavy. They've got safety clips in place, but everything on this machine that I open up could be a possible pinch hazard. But we put clips on there to lock in place so I don't have to worry about the door falling back on me when I got to get in here and look at either the transmission, my fire suppression tanks that might be inside here, or if I use it as a toolbox. So once again, want to just make sure we are careful when we're opening those up, but utilizing those safety features on the machine as well that allows me to get in there and look. Bolts, all my bolts need to be tight on my hitch pin here. Those tights coming across, looking at the bolts, striker arm. Also, I've got a spot on here to keep a shovel. Just as you saw earlier, the undercarriage was a little dirty. I needed to get in there and check that pivot shaft. So I've got a shovel that's hooked up to the back. I want to make sure that stays on, but that's going to allow me to be able to keep that undercarriage clean each night when I get done working for the day. As I come here, this gives me good line of sight, right, once again on this side to the dew cone seals and my final drives and my pivot shaft located in there. I want to make sure there's nothing caught in there. I work my way around as I'm looking up, down. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to start my inspection now on this side of the machine, pretty much doing the same thing that I did over on the other side. I'm going to look at my idlers. I'm going to look at my track, my pins. I want to make sure, get underneath the guarding. I want to make sure all the bolts are in place. I want to make sure all the bolts are tight here as well on those roller frame as I work across, okay? Final drive. Once again, make sure there's no leaks. Pivot shaft. And then also on this side, I've got my hydraulic tank. Right here, I've got a sight glass. Right there, it's telling me where my safe zone is. So I need to take a look at that as I'm working away. And also on top is my hydraulic fill. Working my way back again this way, paying attention to my idler bearing. Make sure it's clean. Once again, looking at the guarding underneath here, all the rollers, all the bolts. Make sure everything's in place. It's tight. Make sure I don't have any fluid leaking out around the cylinder here, and then the front idler, and once again, all the bolts. And as this track is clean, I want to make sure all the bolts on my track shoes are tight as well. So now we'll come around here to the front, and I'm going to climb up top so we can go look transmission fluid and the hydraulic tank, okay? But I'm going to put my foot once again on that safety step, put a hand there, utilizing 3 points of contact as I climb the machine. Now, a couple things we're going to look at. Hydraulic fill tank. Want to fill right here. I've got a breather right here on top. We want to always just check that breather, make sure it's clean and free of debris and not plugged up. Up top. So two things up top here. Number one, my transmission fill. So you'll notice it's purple. Once again, with Cat, all of our fluids are color-coded. Transmission is purple, and also it's got the ISO symbol on there. It's got a transmission gear and an oil drop. Tells me it's transmission fluid. And then as I look at my dipstick, we're going to wipe that off. Now we look good. Now the one thing we will point out with the transmission stick, this is double-sided. I've got a hot check and I've got a cold check. So when we're looking at the fluids and I'm doing that daily walk around in the morning to get started, make sure I'm looking at the cold side where it says cold, safe to start. We also have our transmission fill right next to the dipstick, okay? That's where we're going to fill. Another thing I'm going to point out up top here, there's a breather for the transmission right next to the fill and right next to the dipstick. Once again, we just want to keep an eye on that. Keep a rag with us, wipe that off, and make sure we keep it clean. Because that will get plugged up and then start causing some shift issues and some overheats in our transmission. Another thing we got on the cab door the door right here is once again that racetrack sticker. It's going to tell me where all my grease points are, where all my fluid checks are, and it's got a line going around, and it's going to tell me how often I either need to grease it, how often I need to check it, and where that's located. This is a very important sticker to keep on there, okay? But once again, I can get all that information out of the operation and maintenance manual as well. Okay, one last thing in this area to check is I'm going to open up this door, and inside here, I have my transmission oil filter. I have my hydraulic oil filter. Inside here, I've got SOS ports, and I've got pressure points. Now, the big difference between the two of them, so I know what's what, is the pressure checks. Those are going to be just a solid black rubber cover. And then the SOS ports, where we're going to take a sample, is going to have the ISO symbol on it, and it's going to be color-coded to whatever fluid that is. So that's how we can tell the difference on those. Okay, we close that up. We're going to move on to the engine compartment. Before I go to the engine compartment, though, I want to point out and look at, we've got tie-off points up top. So if I got to get up and run around this machine up top here and I need to tie off, I can hook up to my tie-off bars up top. I've got a hook there on the end. And then also, we have the integrated beacon. So every time that my disconnect power is on, I've got the beacon integrated, the safety beacon integrated into the machine that's automatically going to be running. So tie-off points to keep us safe. Now, let's open up the engine compartment. And what I'm looking for inside here is, obviously you can see the Caterpillar emissions module, or better known as our Tier 4. It's got the heat wrap around it to protect it. But basically, I'm just looking for anything out of place here. Any debris that might be inside there. Any, I might be looking for any corrosion. Possibly that would indicate a depth leak of fluid. Also, I've got the heat wrap around my turbo. So I want to make sure I've got the heat wraps in there. I want to make sure I don't have any debris. And that's going to be part of my post-shift walk-around as well, to remove any of that debris out of that engine, possibly out of that engine compartment. Okay, we'll shut the engine. I'm going to take a quick look at my my lift cylinders here. Okay, I've got a Zerk back here. Want to make sure I know how often I should be greasing that. Once again, I'm going to take my rag. I'm going to pull the rag out. Make sure I'm just keeping things clean. And check the condition of my chrome on my cylinder. So this right here has got some mud on it. So now that I'm here, I want to make sure that I just wipe that off and keep that clean before it runs the possibility of getting back into my hydraulic system. Okay? Zerk on the end. Want to make sure that I'm greasing that as well. Going to inspect my handrails, my handholds. Make sure the bolts are tight. Make sure everything's tight up top. Make sure my lights are still protected and nothing's out of place or broke. We'll put our rag back in our pocket. Now I'm going to dismount the machine using the 3 points of contact and coming back down to the ground safely. Finishing up here in the front, once again, same thing I did on the other side, right? I want to look at the condition of upper and lower on my C-frame, where I hook up to my blade, my hoses. Once again, I'll take my rag out. I'll look at my cylinders here. I'll wipe that dust boot off inside there too, keeping that clean. I'm going to look inside the bolts once again on this side for that, where the C-frame hooks up into the blade. And then I've got my cylinders here for my VPAT. I've got grease Zerks. Once again, making sure I know how often am I greasing those Zerks. What's it tell me in that operation and maintenance manual? And I know we keep going back and talking about the operation and maintenance manual, but once again, everything I want to know about this piece of equipment and how to maintain it properly and how to operate it properly and in the most efficient manner is all right there in that operation and maintenance manual. So I can't stress enough about going back and looking at that. And then as I come out, I look down through here, I can see my equalizer bar that we talked about. I can see this side of my final drive and my pivot shaft. I'm looking for anything out of the ordinary, anything that just might be broke or out of place, okay? Once again, looking in there, and I'm gonna go ahead and turn around and just look at the back side of my blade. I'm looking at welds. I'm looking for any structural damage. I'm looking at the trash rack to make sure it's in place. And then also hoses and looking for any leaks. I work my way out to come around to the front of the blade to complete my inspection around the front of the blade. Okay, now we're gonna work our way out, and now we wanna talk about the front of the blade, okay? So some of the things, once again, I'm gonna look for on this blade is, number one, I'm gonna look for any damage to the blade, okay? I need to make sure I don't have any damage there, but I'm also gonna look at my cutting edge. And what I'm looking for across on the cutting edge is, I'm looking at all the bolts in place, and I need to make sure they're all tight. So once again, I'll go back to the methodology of if I've got bolts in it that all have dirt or debris built up around them, but I got one that doesn't have any built up around it, draws my attention to it that says, hey, maybe that one's loose, right? But I want to physically look at every one of them and make sure every one of them is tight across that cutting edge, okay? Now, the other thing I want to look at is my trash rack. I want to look at each individual piece of steel coming across. It's welded in 3 spots. And I need to make sure all those welds are structurally sound. There's no cracks in the welds. I need to look, make sure I don't have any structural damage to the trash rack or anything, of that nature. But I'm going to look at that all the way across the blade. I'm going to look across the whole front of the blade, and I'm going to look at the cutting edge all the way across. And as you notice too, my cutting edge is in 4 sections. I have the 2 corner pieces, and then I got the 2 pieces in the middle. So need to look, make sure all the bolts are tight, no structural damage, and that'll complete my walk around on the front of the blade here. Okay, so we've completed our walk around inspection from the ground level. Now our next step is we're going to get up into the cab, but then there's a couple things we need to check as we work our way up into the cab. So I'm going to mount the machine using 3 points of contact. First thing we need to check, we need to open this side of the engine compartment. Need to come down. I got my engine fill and I've got my engine dipstick check. We're going to pull out the dipstick, check the oil, wipe the oil off. Oil looks good. Now, once again, we're going to point out on this one, double-sided dipstick. So I've got a side that has the engine at a low idle and is hot, and then I also have a cold check. So when we check the dipstick and that oil level, make sure we're checking the right side of the dipstick. Our engine air filter right here on top, but once again, I'm just going to look inside, make sure there's no debris, make sure there's nothing in the radiator, anything packed in there, and if there is, I need to remove that. I've also got a switch for my lights inside the engine compartment. So if we're working in the dark, I've got lighting inside the engine enclosure. We also have the safety bar that locks into place, so it's going to keep the door from swinging back and shutting on us. Make sure that's in place. So we checked our oil, we checked our engine compartment. Now we're going to come up inside. We're going to look inside, right inside the door here is our battery compartment. I want to check this each day as well and make sure that I don't have any debris built up on the battery cables. I want to make sure I don't have any trash inside there either that could possibly be an ignition source for a fire around the battery. So I need to keep this area clean. Up top, this is our fill for our def. I've got a sticker up top that tells me how much def to add. So basically what it's telling me is when I add my def, if I have my key on, when the def comes up to 90% full, it's going to honk the horn at me twice to let me know that the def tank is full. Okay, it's size proportion to the size of diesel. So each stage of where the gauge is in the cab tells me how many gallons it's going to take to fill that up. But the main thing is, when this is 90% full, the key is on, then the disconnect's on, the power's on, it'll honk the horn at me, okay? Now we're ready to get in the cab. The next thing I want to do, I want to turn the power on, and we're ready to get in and start the cab up. The other thing we'll point out from a safety feature, integrated safety beacon into the machine. So every time that disconnect switch is on, I've got the beacon on. And then our window washer fluid tank is right there. So with that, we'll climb into the cab and get started to work.